My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sankaran, Guru Piran, fellow Jnanis. Today I'm going to continue the Katha Upanishad, and we're going to cover some very important concepts. And the last time I talked about, if you see on page 92, in this Lord Yama speaks about how, about the cosmic soul and the individual soul. And then he speaks about how he introduced this chariot model where it helps identify our identity. So this is something what I call the divine knowledge from this Advaita philosophy. He says something which is very interesting, which is actually about how consider the embodied soul as the master, right? And he's going to give you a chariot model, and the body as the chariot, and the intellect as the charioteer, and the mind as the reins that holds the horses. So here he gives this description of the horses, the 5 horses, and the soul. And I'm going to break it down into one by one component that helps us identify what is the difference between body, soul, mind, ego, and so on. So to simplify this, what I did was I developed this framework here, a chariot model, which has about 11 components, right? So I'm going to break down one by one components to show you how this model depicts our identity. The first one is actually, if you see number 1 there, that's our path that we travel, that is the gross matter, that the world we live in, the material universe. Now I'll give you in detail what these are, right? And the number 2 is actually our body. The chariot is the body. So 1 is the road that the chariot travels. That road is actually the world that we live in, the universe that we live in. And, so that's the description he gives in this Upanishad. Number 2 is that the chariot. Number 3 is actually our senses. The 5 horses are 5 senses, what we call the senses window. And then he goes on to explain that the 4 is actually the reins that hold the horses. So for me, that is actually our neural pathway in the brains. The reins are what we call the manas, right? So the ones that holds our senses. The 5th one is actually our ego or consciousness, which is the ahamkara, which is the mind senses born. And I'll explain one by one what this is, right? Because this is really important, because it's describing that self, that individual self and the cosmic self. Number 6 is actually our intellect, right? The ability for us to, learn. That's the driver that tells us where we want to go and so on. Number 7 is actually the conch that he holds. This is the intellect-mind bond, and I'll explain that, right? Number 8 is actually our, what we call the, instruction from the passenger. So we're getting this instruction from the passenger telling us what we need to do. Number 9 is the instruction. What is that instruction? So the passenger will say, go to the right, or go to the left, or go to this place, right? So that's the instruction, right? And here the instruction is actually the wisdom knowledge, and there's a description of that, the bow and arrow. Number 10 is actually the hold of the bow, the passenger and the driver's bond. So here, the passenger here is none other than the soul or the Atma, and the hold is actually the hold of the soul and the driver. So so that bond is so important, right? So, and of course, the 11th one is the soul itself. So let me explain to you what this Upanishad is trying to tell us, right? So this is what it is, right? So to summarize this 11 steps of our personality, the first 2 is actually about the experience or the object, which is the material universe and our body. This is the object reality. This is the gross matter. Then we have from 3 to 10, which covers our senses, right up to that whole is what we call mechanism of experience. So this is the subtle matter. Sometimes we call it antakarana, the mind, right? And the last one is actually number 11, which is actually the experiencer or the jiva. So in all of us, we have this chariot. We have this 11 key functions, right? So let me take you through this. So let's take the first one. What is the first one? The first one is actually the path we travel, the gross matter, the world that we live in. So all of us, we have to ride this road. And sometimes some roads are straight, so no problem. We can, go straight without any hindrance, speed up. Others are sometimes bent. Some roads are bumpy. Some roads are very dangerous. Some roads are slippery. But some roads are broken. So, so that is the world that we live in, right? So what in this is explained is that he said, be prepared for change because the road is going to change, right? Not always you get straight road. So change is the only constant in this material world. And very interestingly, also, he says that each type of path will determine the speed that we take to travel. Of course, if it's very rainy and slippery, we kind of a little bit more cautious, right? So if we have a very kind of a tough period of our life, we kind of we have to be careful how we make decisions. Sometimes the path is broken completely. So it says that stop the journey, take a breath, take a rest, catch your breath, and maybe sometimes find a different path. So the most important thing is for us is that we are all going to ride these roads, right? And it may vary, but we need to know the rules of that road, right? So like every road, we have the laws and the regulations, know what the rules are, the signposts, and also we have to realize that sometimes the signposts are there. Stop or don't turn right. All those signposts are there to tell us things that we should do, should not do, action and inaction, right? So sometimes we fail to follow the rules and there are penalties that we have to pay, right? So he's explaining this material universe using this chariot. This material universe, as we know, it's a four-dimensional thing, three-dimensional space and time. It's made out of matter, water, air, fire, and space. And each one of them have its own laws that governs it, right? So this material world is governed by these laws, and you have push, pull, spin forces, sukha dukkha, all those things are part and parcel of this journey, this road that we travel. He says, know this really well. Know the roads that you are traveling. That means he's saying that know that the experiences that you're going to get, right? So this is Lord Yama is explaining this chariot. Then he goes on to explain, okay, now that you know the road, the next important thing is actually you should know about your chariot. It's nothing but the body, right? One is to know the road. The next one is actually to know about the chariot. So know what your chariot or the body is made out of. It's made out of matter and energy. It's got four dimensions. There is birth and death. There's a beginning and end for the body. And it's continuously changing, right? You can't hold on to the youth always. It's going to go and change until you age, and one fine day the body will drop off, right? So he says that you're going to change. He says that keep the body toned. That will help us with the senses so that we can enjoy our journey very well. So he also says that remember some of the chariot has shock absorbers, right? Some don't have shock absorbers. So every time you ride the road, it's very bumpy. So he says, make sure you have shock absorbers that soften the ride. So even though you're going through a difficult period, that shock absorbers you see is none other than that knowledge to help dampen that bumpy road. So he's describing the road and the chariot, right? So he says that important thing is if you know your chariot very well and you maintain your chariot very well, you keep your body very well, it is the source of health, happiness, relaxation, and all those things. Don't abuse your body. Don't abuse your chariot. If you don't look after your chariot, the chariot will not be able to give you a good ride. It will always break down, and one fine day, you will not be able to use it. So he says that, yeah, the road can be very tough, but if your chariot is strong, it'll still ride through. Right? Maybe if the road is really bad, you should not ride it. Just inaction is probably the best. Right? So here it is that he describes the chariot as the body. Then he describes the senses. The senses window are the 5 horses. He says this is called the karmandriyas and the jnanendriyas, the 5 sensory organs. Right? He says these organs or these horses are important to cognize this material world. Right? Without these horses, you will not be able to cognize this material world. So he says, but you need to tone the horses. You need to train the horses. The horses cannot be wild. If all the horses are running in different direction, you see that the chariot will have an uncomfortable ride and maybe even tumble. So he said, keep the horses well toned and trained, right? So that it is able to run the race very well. Right? So sometimes you see that they cover the horse's eyes so that it stays focused. It doesn't get distracted. So sometimes we have to keep our sight in one direction. So you say that if you look after the horses, it will have the stamina to last the race, right? So you need to tone that senses so that, it is able to overcome many of those desires. He says that, be agile. The horses need to be agile to traverse different terrain. Sometimes you see it's very mountainous, but the horses are able to traverse that quite easily, right? So he says that the senses need to be refined so that any turbulence it's able to overcome. The muscles, of the horses act as shock absorbers against the difficult terrain. So the horses, play a key role in kind of dampening the effects. So we see that the 5 senses are none other than the horses, right? So here it is, he's explaining that our identity in the first 3 is understand the road, where you are, understand the body, make sure you understand the laws of the body, and the senses. If you learn to master that, the body will be toned and be able to ride the horses really well. So this is what I want to cover today. And because there are about 10 to 11, I won't cover everything. Here is actually identifying that small I that gives us that material personality, the experience of the material universe, our body, and also our senses. And he says that make sure they are well toned. So I'm going to stop here. I won't go into the other aspects of the chariot, but next week I will cover the comprehensive aspect of the mind, because the mind itself has many components that are interrelated. So I was going to cover that next week and have a question and answer session on these 3 things of our roads. Do you know that the road you are traveling, do you understand the rules of engagement? The body also has a particular law. How do we understand the laws of our own body, our own dynamics, right? And that's part of the self-realization. And the last one is our own senses. Are our senses under control? How do we manage our senses? How do we manage the desires? How do we manage, you know, the difficult, the senses being pulled in different directions? So again, he says that, my dear Nachiketa, our body is like chariot. These are components of the chariot. But the most important thing later on you'll see is that part 11 where who is the rider of the chariot? Sandosham.